القمة الروسية الأفريقية هي يعني القمة الأولى من نوعها وبتعكس اهتمام
Summit is the first of its kind, and it reflects great importance and concern between Russia and African countries, like the other importance given internationally in other international gatherings by great powers and world powers. There are different gatherings and different conferences that bring together these countries with Africa, and today Russia joins this method and approach, and this is evidence of the great opportunities present in African countries. For example, investment and taking the best advantage of the natural resources present in Egypt, in Africa, and other human resources. Africa has 70% of its population from the youth. These are all topics and things that pushed Russia to start establishing the first forum of its kind, the African-Russian Forum, and this is an extension of the Russian history already there in Africa, which is abundant with our white hands, and Russia and Africa launching the first forum of cooperation with economic cooperation with leaders, economic leaders, and the community of business leaders between Russia and Africa simultaneously. The summit, the Russian-African Summit, was co-chaired with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the President of the African Union, and President Putin in the first two sessions. And also the economic forum related to cooperation between Russia and Africa will also be co-chaired with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and President Putin. There is a very important part in the President's visit to Sochi, the city of Sochi today, which is the bilateral point between Russia and Egypt. Let us say that now the relations between Egypt and Russia have witnessed a breakthrough in different and old fields, whether developmentally, economically, or commercially, or industrially. There is also many stages and main stations that are very significant and very obvious in the national projects that Egypt are doing. For example, the Dab'a plant and the Russian industrial zone in Suez, and also developing the railways. And there are 1,300 cars Egypt is importing from the Russian company, and there are many cooperation, and this will be proposed and presented from all aspects during the Egyptian-African Summit that will include President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and President Putin tomorrow morning. What are the elements that the closing session will focus on? The closing statement that you have mentioned will be a plan, the road plan that will launch this summit and will draw and map the future relationship in this summit with African countries. And this final announcement will crystallize a mechanism, a future mechanism of how this summit will be led, the Russia-African Summit, through its sessions every year, and whether Russia will be the country hosting it or other countries, and on the presidential level, and whether it will include other mechanisms of the ministers involved and foreign ministers involved and the subsidiary committees. All this will be tackled in the final statement. But there is another issue that will be tackled, which is the fields of infrastructure and industry, and with putting special focus on execution and ways of connection. This and the natural resources as well, and also the human resources, but it still lacks to a large extent, the infrastructure and the rail connection and the air connection. When you want to move between African countries, you have to go and transit from Europe, through Europe, and this is very important, integral for interdisciplinary trade. And there is a mechanism that we have proposed, which is the FTA. This mechanism will be included in the final statement, and we will say that we will say how we should take advantage of this, and we will also highlight the importance of cooperation with Russia in healthcare and education and scientific research and mass communication and tourism, and well as culture. This is a very important point. There is another important point and a main and vital point in the closing statement, which is exchanging information, intelligence information related to combating terrorism and fanaticism, fanatic ideas. As you can see, the scope of terrorism is expanding and not decreasing. The events in the Middle East is leading to the leaking of elements, terrorist elements, and African countries should cooperate with Russia. This is very important, and the final statement will tackle this point. And the norm usually followed in final statements is that the principles of international law is referred to, and because all of this is applied in the framework of the international law and preserving the sovereignty of countries, and a principle that African countries withhold is solving the problems in African countries in cooperation with the international community. We refer to a meeting between the President and President Putin. What are the most significant and the most obvious issues that will be discussed in light of the developments in Syria and the developments of combating terrorism, and also on the bilateral relations, the discussions about the free trade zone and returning flights to what are the most significant points that will be tackled? You mentioned all the significant points that will be tackled, and we are awaiting the discussions of these points between the two presidents. But to give details, this type of meetings are divided into different aspects, and the first aspect is the bilateral aspect. The second thing is the industrial and economic cooperation. There are huge Russian projects executed in Egypt in order to push the wheel of development, and the most important of this is the industrial zone and the Dab'a plan of generating nuclear energy and developing the railways, as I have told you. And there are many fields such as military cooperation, and the other aspect is the security cooperation in combating terrorism and extremist thought and organized crime in the Middle East, and also the very widespread terrorist organization, whether in northern Iraq or Libya. We have to cooperate very closely with Russia and exchange informations and databases. This boosts and enforces the process of combating terrorism for everyone and not just Egypt. There is also another very important aspect related to the mutual negotiations and exchanging views between both presidents in relation to political issues on the regional and international level, and these events are consecutive, and the presidents give them very important due importance, and this will be very beneficial for both countries.